Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome. My name is Nicole and I am an alcoholic. And welcome to the 12 Traditions Workshop, ensuring that AA will be here for future generations. This workshop is written by John A. from West Palm Beach, Florida. And I'm your host, Nicole Scott, a grateful alcoholic. If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. Albert Einstein. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our workshop on the 12 Traditions, where we will go through the 12 traditions in 4 hours. Let's start with a moment of silence to reflect on what we're about to do here today, followed by the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. You could be any place else right now, but instead you're here with us. We're happy to have you here making this investment in your sobriety. You're making a huge deposit into your IRA, your individual recovery account, by being here and participating. Keep making these deposits no matter how small, because one day you may have a situation that will require you to make a huge withdrawal, and you don't want your IRA to be depleted. The purpose of this workshop is to help us get a better understanding of the AA 12 traditions and why they are important to the survival of Alcoholics Anonymous. Brick and mortar traditions meetings are usually smaller in attendance than step and regular meetings. People just don't want to hear about the traditions. That was the case when Bill Wilson first wrote about the traditions back in 1946. Groups used to love to invite Bill to speak, but they would ask him not to speak too much about the traditions thingy. Bill had the foresight, however, to see that some structure was needed in AA because he didn't want AA to implode and disappear as another movement had disappeared in less than 20 years after it was founded in the early 1800s. I'm sure some people attending this meeting are asking themselves, what's the big deal about the AA traditions? Do we really need them? Does it matter if I don't adhere to the AA traditions? Well, the AA traditions are a very big deal. If we want Alcoholics Anonymous to be around for generations to come, we need to adhere to the 12 traditions. That is why we don't bring up outside issues as topics of discussion. If someone brings up an outside issue during their share, we can stop the share or let it continue, but get the meeting back on recovery and sobriety when they're done. Regardless of the intention, if we let in one outside issue, then we open a Pandora's box. The traditions help us stay focused on our primary purpose. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety. I'm sure you recognize that previous sentence from the AA preamble that we read at every meeting. We do one thing and we do it very well. The 12 steps can be useful to almost everyone in this world, but in Alcoholics Anonymous, we use the 12 steps and the principles behind the 12 steps to help us stay sober and become happy, joyous, and free. Page 15 of the 12 and 12. A's 12 steps are a group of principles, spiritual in their nature, which, if practiced as a way of life, can expel the obsession to drink and enable the sufferer to become happily and usefully whole. Grapevine pamphlet on the AA traditions. When an alcoholic applies the 12 steps of our recovery program to his personal life, his disintegration stops and his unification begins. The power which now holds him together in one piece overcomes those forces which had rent him apart. Exactly the same principle applies to each AA group and to Alcoholics Anonymous as a whole, so long as the ties which bind us together prove far stronger than those forces which would divide us if they could. All will be well. We shall be secure as a movement. Our essential unity will remain a certainty. I think most of the people in AA now are dually addicted. They identify as an alcoholic addict. There are even some people in AA who mostly did drugs, but they like AA more so they mostly, if not only, attend AA meetings. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that. However, out of respect for AA and in keeping with our singleness of purpose, they should stick to talking about alcohol when sharing or speaking in an AA meeting. Your story is your story, so you don't have to omit the fact that drugs are part of your story, but there is no need to go into much detail about the drug usage in an AA meeting. Don't be afraid to use the 4-letter word, drug, in your story because alcohol is a drug, nor should you apologize. As I mentioned, alcohol is a drug. Drugs are mentioned in the big book. Again, You just don't need to go into great detail about your drug use in an AA meeting. 12 and 12, page 150. Shoemaker, stick to thy last. Better do one thing supremely well than many badly. That quote starts off tradition 5, but Bill could have used to explain the purpose of the AA traditions. As recovering alcoholics, we are in a unique position to help the suffering drunk. It is not only our primary purpose in 12-step work, but it is also our specialty, if you will. The recovering addict or alcoholic has a special ability where others may fail, which is to help the suffering newcomer. AA does not want to become a jack of all trades and a master of none. As previously stated, we do one thing and we do it well. We have a niche market that we dominate. We've seen companies get spread too thin by trying to do too much, and they eventually go out of business. We have a business model that startups have emulated very successfully. I can't tell you how many other 12-step programs are an offshoot of AA. We are an open source program with a great example of open collaboration. You are free to use our material in your program. We wish you all the best because we are not afraid. We are not competing with anyone. So the history of the 12 traditions. Bill Wilson did not just wake up one day and decided he was going to write the 12 and 12. In the mid to late 40s, Alcoholics Anonymous was fracturing and splintering. The various AA groups around the world had their own rules for being a member of their own group. Bill Wilson asked the various groups to send in their requirements for being a member of their group. And it is said that if he had put all those requirements into a book, that book would have been bigger than the big book. AA was doing itself in. AA was being torn apart from within. A great civilization is not conquered from without until it was destroyed itself within. Will Durant. Fortunately, Bill had some knowledgeable people around him, and one of those people told him about the Washingtonian movement. Upon researching the Washingtonians, Bill decided that something had to be done to try to get all the AA groups around the world on the same page. In April of 1946, Bill W. wrote an article for the Grapevine entitled 12 Suggested Points for AA Tradition, an early presentation of what would become known simply as the 12 traditions. With his usual foresight, Bill had looked around the program some 10 years after he and Dr. Bob met in Akron in 1935 and realized that as AA grew, it was important to preserve its unity and singleness of purpose. During the 1940s, Bill received hundreds of letters from the AA groups that were springing up all over the country, letters asking him sometimes contentious questions about group autonomy issues, AA endorsement of outside enterprises, and the like. These letters, which describe what Bill would call a welter of exciting and fearsome experience, playing a key role in helping him formulate the 12 traditions. Published one by one in the Grapevine from December 1947 to November 1948, and adopted at the First International Convention in Cleveland in 1950. The traditions provided guidelines, not rules, that would help AA groups then and in the future conduct themselves in their relationship with the outside world and with Alcoholics Anonymous itself. I offer these suggestions, Bill wrote in that first April 1946 article, neither as one man's dictum nor as a creed of any kind, but rather as a first attempt to portray that group ideal toward which we were assuredly being led by a higher power these 10 years past. In 1950, AA members were approaching 100,000, and there were about 3,500 groups worldwide. Bill started writing the 12 and 12 in 1952, and it was then published in 1953. So what's the difference between the 12 steps and the 12 traditions? The AA 12 steps have become firmly entrenched as a path toward recovery from addictions, not just to alcohol, but to drugs and to other addictions as well. These steps, which emphasize acknowledging the problem, seeking help, and continuing to practice healthy behaviors, are a key part of recovery programs of all kinds and a cornerstone of recovery for over 1 million alcoholics worldwide. The AA traditions, on the other hand, offer a set of spiritual and practical guidelines for governing the AA organization itself. These traditions establish the practices that allow the organization to stay focused on one objective, to provide a free, always available haven for anyone who wants to stop drinking and build a new sober life. The 12 steps are how it works, and 12 traditions are why it works. Many people think that traditions are for the individual, but they are not. You may choose to try to apply the traditions in your own personal life, but the traditions are for the survival of Alcoholics Anonymous. Some people say that the steps keep them from committing suicide and the traditions keep them from committing homicide. That sounds cute, but it is nothing but crap. If someone only says that to you to try to explain the steps and the traditions, it is proof that they don't know what they're talking about when it comes to truly explaining the 12 steps and the 12 traditions. If each AA group worldwide follows the same recipe with very little deviations, we will get a very similar product worldwide. By adhering to the traditions and our AA literature, it'll allow us almost every AA meeting in the world to be exactly alike, but a bit different. You've seen that for yourself in brick and mortar meetings as well as Zoom meetings. They are all the same, but each one is a little bit different. Okay, sit back and let's learn how we can do our part to ensure the survival of Alcoholics Anonymous for generations to come. We will pause for about 10 minutes after each tradition for any questions. So keep your questions brief and to the point. We were going to need a timer, and we'll have a 15-minute break at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time or after tradition 6.
Tradition 1. Tradition 1 short form. Our common welfare should come first. Personal recovery depends upon AA unity. Tradition 1 long form. Each member of Alcoholics Anonymous is but a small part of a great whole. AA must continue to live, or most of us will surely die. Hence, our common welfare comes first, but individual welfare follows close afterwards. This tradition is fairly simple and cut and dry. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. We can do together what I can't do alone. I am my brother's keeper. We don't shoot our wounded. We all must hang together or die separately. In the Marine Corps, one of our creeds was, "You're only as strong as the weakest link." In the 12 and 12 on page 129, it states, "The unity of Alcoholics Anonymous is the most cherished quality our society has. Our lives, the lives of all to come, depend squarely upon it. We stay whole or AA dies. Without unity, the heart of AA would cease to beat. Our world arteries would no longer carry the life-giving grace of God. His gift to us would be spent aimlessly. Back again in their caves, alcoholics would reproach us and say, 'What a great thing AA might have been.' We don't arrive in Alcoholics Anonymous on the same boat, but we are all in the same boat after getting here. It doesn't matter if you lived on Park Avenue or the park bench. You may have gotten here on a yacht, or you floated over on a rubber inner tube to get to AA. None of that matters. We are all equal. We are alcoholics. We are in the same boat now. In the big book on page 17, it states we are average Americans. All sections of this country and many of its occupations are represented, as well as many political, economic, social, and religious backgrounds. We are people who normally would not mix, but there exists among us a fellowship, a friendliness, and an understanding, which is indescribably wonderful. We are like the passengers of a great liner. The moment after rescue from shipwreck, when camaraderie, joyousness, and democracy pervade the vessel from steerage to captain's table. Unlike the feelings of the ship's passengers, however, our joy in escape from disaster does not subside as we go our individual ways. The feeling of having shared in a common peril is one element in the powerful cement which binds us. But that in itself would never have held us together as we are now joined. 12 and 12, page 131. Countless times in as many cities and hamlets, we reenacted the story of Eddie Rickenbacker and his courageous company when their plane crashed in the Pacific. Like us, they had suddenly found themselves saved from death. but still floating upon a perilous sea. How well they saw that their common welfare came first. None might become selfish of water or bread. Each needed to consider the others, and in abiding faith, they knew they must find their real strength. And this they did find, in measure to transcend all the defects of their frail craft, every test of uncertainty, pain, fear, and despair, and even the death of one. Putting Tradition 1 to use in Alcoholics Anonymous allows us to put we before me. One person should not dominate the shares in a meeting. The meetings are not about one person. We use a timer so that everyone can have equal time in sharing. We cannot kick someone out of AA, but if someone jeopardizes a group's existence in a location, then that person needs to go so that the group can continue. They may return if they get their act together. Predators should not be allowed free rein in an AA group. Tradition 1 checklist. Our common welfare should come first. Personal recovery depends upon AA unity. 1, am I in my group a healing, mending, integrating person? Am I sometimes divisive? Do I ever gossip or take another member's inventory? 2, am I a peacemaker, or do I foster arguments with statements such as, just for the sake of discussion? 3, am I gentle with those who rub me the wrong way, or am I sometimes abrasive? 4, do I make competitive AA remarks, such as comparing one group with another, or contrasting AA in one place with AA in another? 5, do I ever put down some AA activities for not participating in this or that aspect of AA? 6, am I informed about AA as a whole? Do I support AA as a whole in every way I can, or just the parts that I understand and approve of? 7, am I considerate of AA members as I want them to be of me? And 8, do I spout platitudes about love while indulging in and secretly justifying behavior that bristles with hostility? Thank you for letting me be of service.
And thank you, Patrice. Thank you for your service. Okay, so we're going to open it for any questions or comments after each tradition. I just need, Mike, are you willing to time for me?
Yeah, just 5 minutes, because we have 12 of them.
Yeah.
So even those 5 minutes is going to add an hour. If we have no questions, let's just move on.
Okay. Okay, we're going to go on then to Tradition 2. Nikki, come on in.
Hi, Nikki, alcoholic. I will be reading Tradition 2. Tradition 2. For our group purpose, there is but one ultimate authority, a loving God, as he may express himself in our group conscience. Our leaders are but trusted servants. They do not govern. In AA, there is no such thing as individual authority. No one member directs or controls the actions of other members of the group. This is a very simple 2-sentence tradition, but encompasses quite a bit. This might be the tradition that you will come across the most and will probably be personally affected by the most during your time in AA and attending AA meetings and being involved in service in AA. With Tradition 2, we will be discussing the group conscience, the minority opinion, the role of group leaders, and the spirit of rotation. Group conscience. So what exactly is a group conscience? How does a group conscience differ from a group opinion or a majority vote or a business meeting? The group conscience is the collective conscience of the group membership, and this represents a substantial unanimity of on one issue before definitive action is taken. This is achieved by the group members through the sharing of full information, individual points of view, and the practice of AA's principles. To be fully informed requires a willingness to listen to minority opinions with an open mind. On sensitive issues, the group works slowly, discouraging formal motions until a clear sense of its collective view emerges. Placing principles before personalities, the membership is wary of dominant opinions. Its voice is heard when a well-informed group arrives at a decision. The rest results on more than a yes or no count, precisely because it is the spiritual expression of the group conscience. The term informed group conscience implies that pertinent information has been studied and all views have been heard before the group votes. The difference between a group conscience and a majority vote or group opinion is that one or more of the elements described above is missing. There are two ways to arrive at a group conscience. One, the competitive way lets the person with the loudest voice to push his idea across, take a vote, and come up with a majority decision. This is not an informed group conscience. Two, group members should come together in mutual trust to arrive at a group decision, not one individual's personal triumph. One suggested way is for the group to make an announcement that 2 weeks from tonight or a month, there will be a group conscience meeting on a given subject. The group will read, explain, and give out copies of the subject you'll be asked to go home and talk about, think about it, and pray about it, and you'll vote at the group conscience meeting on the appointed night. A cooperative and informed group conscience calls for facts or presentation on both sides of a question. The meeting should not be thrown open for general discussion. This would allow the more vocal members to set the debate. It is suggested that the chairman call on every member in turn, allowing 2 to 3 minutes for each to speak. No member should speak a second time until all have had their turn. This gives even the quietest person an equal chance. The chairperson expresses his opinion only after all the others have spoken. Based on what we have just read about the group conscience, we can clearly see that a lot of the changes that occur in business meetings are not based on a true group conscience, since not all the members are present at the business meeting. If a change is proposed in a business meeting, it should be tabled until a group conscience meeting is held in 2 weeks or until the next business meeting. It should also be announced at each meeting that a vote is coming up on a proposal. You'll sometimes hear some people use the term informed group conscience, but I don't think we need to amend this second tradition at all. The group conscience, as expressed in tradition 2, is a powerful spiritual concept that makes it possible for people of different backgrounds and temperaments to rise above personal ambitions and unite in our common purpose to stay sober and extend the hand of AA to the alcoholic who still suffers. Moving on to the minority opinion. Those voting against a notion have the right to express their opinion in an effort to sway the majority and bring about a unanimous opinion. The late Barry L., author of Do You Think You're Different and Living Sober, was a GSO staff member in 1973 and 74, and tells of the story when the conference had to decide if gay meetings could be so identified in AA directories. The mood of the floor was dead set against the idea. Remember that homosexuality was still a felony and gay men and women were spoken of as deviants. In Barry's 1985 World Conference talk in Montreal, he recalls, the discussion in 1974 went back and forth for 2 days and 2 nights. Much of the agenda was wiped out. I remember one man saying, I guess if this year you list the sex deviants, next year you'll list the rapist AA groups. A delightful woman from one of the northern states, or maybe Canada, standing up about 3 feet tall, came to the middle microphone and pulled it down to her face and said, where I come from, alcoholics are considered deviants. The chairman astutely saw the mood of the floor had changed and he asked if anyone wanted to call the question. The vote was cast and only 2 delegates voted against the gay and lesbian group's inclusion. It was almost unanimous, 129 votes to 2. It is important that the minority voice always be heard, but it should be remembered that while the minority sometimes is right, it is just as often wrong. Unless the minority voice is decidedly persuasive or logical, it should be considered in its proper light as a minority voice. To permit the minority to always influence the majority is to permit the tail to wag the dog. Moving on to group leaders. Group leaders. AA is a non-profit organization. We don't have a guru who leads us and it works very well. You might say that the inmates run the asylum. 12 and 12, page 133 references, being the founder, he is at first the boss. Who else could be? Very soon though, his assumed authority to run everything begins to be shared with the first alcoholics he has helped. At this moment, the benign dictator becomes the chairman of a committee composed of his friends. These are the growing group's hierarchy of service, self-appointed, of course, because there is no other way. In a matter of months, AA booms in Middletown. 12 and 12, pages 134 to 135 say, this brings us straight to the question, does AA have a real leadership? Most emphatically, the answer is yes, notwithstanding the apparent lack of it. Let's turn again to the deposed founder and his friends. What becomes of them? As their grief and anxiety wear away, a subtle change begins. Ultimately, they divide into two classes known in AA slang as elder statesmen and bleeding deacons. The elder statesman is the one who sees the wisdom of the group's decision, who holds no resentment over his reduced status, whose judgment, fortified by considerable experience, is sound, and who is willing to sit quietly on the sidelines, patiently awaiting developments. The bleeding deacon is one who is just as surely convinced that the group cannot get along without him, who constantly connives for re-election to office, and who continues to be consumed with self-pity. A few hemorrhage so badly that, drained of all AA spirit and principle, they get drunk. At times, the AA landscape seems to be littered with bleeding forms. Nearly every old-timer in our society has gone through this process in some degree. Happily, most of them survive and live to become elder statesmen. They become the real and permanent leadership of AA. Theirs is the quiet opinion, the sure knowledge and humble example that resolve a crisis. When sorely perplexed, the group inevitably turns to them for advice. They become the voice of the group conscience. In fact, these are the true voices of Alcoholics Anonymous. They do not drive by mandate, they lead by example. This is the experience which has led us to the conclusion that our group conscience, well advised by its elders, will be in the long run wiser than any single leader. This tradition has been misquoted many times as "we have no leaders," but it clearly states that each group does have its leaders. They just have no authority over the rest of the group. Whether they be the group's representative to the area or district, or the secretary or treasurer, they have been entrusted with the responsibility to serve the group, not make decisions for it. Groups clearly have other leaders also. There are those who, by sharing their wisdom and strength in the meetings, who are quietly recognized by the group as spiritual leaders. There are those members who are so well founded in the principles and traditions of the program, the group turns to when questions arise involving possible violations of those principles and traditions. These too are leaders, but they do not govern either. One interpretation of the second tradition can be tied into another story from the very early days of AA. It involves one of AA's first members receiving a financial opportunity from Towns Hospital, the same hospital that employed Dr. William Silkworth, the physician who wrote the doctor's opinion. There were many benefits of accepting this offer, but it was ultimately the second tradition that held him back. Basically, Bill spoke with several alcoholics who were staying in his house and attending meetings there. He told them that AA would be able to conduct its business in the hospital. He would make more money and he'd be able to help them out by acting as a lay therapist. In his mind, this all sounded good, but he had run it by his wife and she had been less than enthused. When he ran it by the group, they reminded him that sometimes the good is the enemy of the best, something he had told them himself. Bill realized upon hearing this that his prayers on the matter, during which he came to the conclusion that it would be the best option, were misled. In the spirit of the unity, he had to heed group conscience, and in the mind of the group, affiliating AA with an outside institution would be harmful to the program. Bill may have technically been in charge, but he was being led by the feelings of the group, because it was through his friends that his perception of God was revealed. It is important to note that the lack of a traditional government does not deprive AA of all leadership. In fact, 12 Steps and 12 Traditions notes that even those who have been removed from their positions may still act as leaders in the group. And lastly, the spirit of rotation. Do we practice rotating leadership, stepping out of office regardless if we believe others are not available, not willing, and not qualified, or do we remain frozen in office? Traditionally, rotation keeps AA members from becoming frozen in office. It also ensures that group tasks, like nearly everything else in AA, are passed around for all to share. To step out of an AA office you love can be hard. If you have been doing a good job, if you honestly don't see anyone else around willing, qualified, or with the time to do it, and if your friends agree, it is especially tough. But it can be a real step forward in growth, a step into the humility that is, for some people, the spiritual essence of anonymity. Rotation helps to bring us spiritual rewards far from enduring than any fame. With no AA status at stake, we needn't compete for titles or praise. We have complete freedom to serve as we are needed. AA Group Pamphlet, page 34. But then I began to see rotation in action, and I learned the difference between ruling and serving. Rotation is one of the ways we use to make sure we serve and don't rule. AA's tradition of rotation, even if it permits some inexperience and even ignorance, was a bit shocking. Could such a structure stay intact? Wouldn't it finally fall apart? The answer I discovered was this: AA is unified and strong because we are not organized. We've insisted that all those serving AA derive their authority from a loving God expressing himself within the informed group conscience. AA Grapevine, September 1992. So, the Tradition 2 checklist. 1. Do I criticize or do I trust and support my group officers, AA committees and office workers, newcomers and old-timers? Number 2, am I absolutely trustworthy, even in secret, with AA 12th step jobs or other AA responsibilities? 3, do I look for credit in my AA jobs, praise for my AA ideas? 4, do I have to save face in group discussion, or can I yield in good spirit to the group conscience and work cheerfully along with it? 5, although I have been sober a few years, am I still willing to serve my turn at AA chores? 6, in group discussions, do I sound off about matters on which I have no experience and little knowledge? Thank you for letting me read.
Thank you, Nikki. Thank you for that. Is there any questions before we continue? Okay, we're going to go on to Tradition 3. Liz, come on in.
All right. Tradition 3, the only requirement for AA membership is a desire to stop drinking. From 12 and 12, page 139. This tradition is packed with meaning, for AA is really saying to every serious drinker, you are an AA member if you say so. You can declare yourself in, nobody can keep you out. No matter who you are, no matter how low you've gone, no matter how grave your emotional complications, even your crimes, we still can't deny you AA. We don't want to keep you out. We aren't a bit afraid you'll harm us, never mind how twisted or violent you may be. We just want to be sure that you get the same great chance of sobriety that we've had. So you're an AA member the minute you declare yourself. From 12 and 12, page 139. A member gives us a vivid glimpse of those days. At one time, he says, every AA group had many membership rules. Everybody was scared witless that something or somebody would capsize the boat and dump us all back into the drink. Our foundation office asked each group to send in its list of protective regulations. The total list was a mile long. If all those rules had been in effect everywhere, nobody could have possibly joined AA at all. So great was the sum of our anxiety and fear. We were resolved to admit nobody to AA, but that hypothetical class of people we termed pure alcoholics. Except for their guzzling and the unfortunate results thereof, they could have no other complications. So beggars, tramps, asylum inmates, prisoners, queers, plain crackpots, and fallen women were definitely out. Yes, sir, we cater only to pure and respectable alcoholics. Any others would surely destroy us. Besides, if we took in those odd ones, what would decent people say about us? We built a fine mesh fence right around AA. From 12 and 12, page 141. Why did AA finally drop all its membership regulations? Why did we leave it to each newcomer to decide himself whether he was an alcoholic and whether he should join us? Why did we dare to say, contrary to the experience of society and government everywhere, that we would neither punish nor deprive any AA of membership? That we must never compel anyone to pay anything, believe anything, or conform to anything? The answer, now seen in Tradition 3, was simplicity itself. At last, experience taught us that to take away any alcoholic's full chance was sometimes to pronounce his death sentence, and often to condemn him to endless misery. Who dared to be judge, jury, and executioner of his own sick brother? We don't have to submit an application for approval to join AA. There is no credit check to be a member of AA. You don't have to go in front of a committee to join AA. There's no membership fee to be a member of AA. There's no yearly membership fee in AA. You don't have to sell your possessions and take a vow of poverty to join AA. You don't have to give up your religious beliefs to join AA. The bottom line is that you're a member of Alcoholics Anonymous when you say you're a member. AA is a nonprofit organization. You're a member of an AA group when you say you are. You cannot be banned, ostracized, or excommunicated from AA. You can, however, get kicked out of an AA group or an AA clubhouse if you pose a danger to the group or clubhouse in any way. The group or clubhouse can always let you back in if and when you mend your ways. You can always go to another AA group or clubhouse since you didn't get banned from AA. Some old-timers today believe that the fellowship has in fact been diluted by the inclusion into its meetings, those who are primarily dealing with issues other than problems with alcohol, such as drug abuse. They feel that the program has gotten away from its spiritual foundations and primary purpose and may become diluted to the point of ineffectiveness. I guess I'm not an old-timer since I am not of that belief. You'll hear some people use the term watered down AA. AA is not watered down because of the inclusion of people who are dually addicted. AA is not watered down because there aren't enough literature meetings. Alcoholics Anonymous isn't watered down at all if the group carries the message of recovery and hope. If you go to a meeting that stays in the problem and people try to top each other's problems, then you should do yourself a favor and find a different meeting. We will cover group responsibilities and in Tradition 5. If you haven't been to a bad meeting, you're not going to enough meetings. Anyone can go to an open meeting. Closed meetings are for those who have a desire to stop drinking. Even though the chips are not an official part of Alcoholics Anonymous, we still go by Tradition 3 when it comes to getting a white chip. We also call it a desire chip because you can still get one even if you're still drinking, but have the desire to stop drinking. From 12 and 12, page 145. So the hand of Providence early gave us a sign that any alcoholic is a member of our society when he says so. Tradition 3 checklist. Number 1, in my mind, do I prejudge some new AA members as losers? Number 2, is there some kind of alcoholic whom I privately do not want in my AA group? Number 3, do I set myself up as a judge of whether a newcomer is sincere or phony? Number 4, do I let language, religion, or lack of it, race, education, age, or other such things interfere with my carrying the message? Number 5, am I overly impressed by a celebrity, by a doctor or clergyman, or ex-convict? Or can I just treat this new member simply and naturally as one more sick human, like the rest of us? Number 6, when someone turns up at AA needing information or help, even if he can't ask for it aloud, does it really matter to me what he does for a living, where he lives, what his domestic arrangements are, whether he had been to AA before, what his other problems are? Thank you.
And thank you, Liz. Thank you for being of service. Okay, do we have any questions? Okay, we'll continue. Wayne, come on in.
Get back to the right screen here. Hey everybody, I'm Wayne, alcoholic. I'm reading Tradition 4. Tradition 4. Each group should be anonymous except in matters affecting other groups or AA as a whole. In the 12 and 12 pages, 146, anonymity is a $10 word, anonymity word. I don't know. Yeah, it's a $10 word, but it's relation to us. It means simply that every AA group can manage its affairs exactly as it pleases, except for when AA as a whole is threatened. Comes now the same question raised in Tradition 1: isn't such liberty foolishly dangerous? 12 and 12 pages, 146 through 147. When AA's traditions were first published in 1946, we had become sure that AA group could stand almost any amount of battering. We saw that the group, exactly like the individual, must eventually conform to whatever tested principles would guarantee survival. We had discovered that there was a perfect safety in the process of trial and error. So confident of this, we had become an original statement of AA tradition carried this significant sentence: any 2 or 3 alcoholics gathered for sobriety may call themselves an AA group, provided that the group they have no other affiliation. Tradition 4 of the 12 traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous states that the freedom individual groups have carried with it to nomination to protect the fellowship as a whole. This means that meeting formats can vary from group to group. It also is cautious against straying too far from its usual program. This means that there are almost as many different kinds of meetings as there are alcoholics. Tradition 4 ensures us that you're most guaranteed to find the 12-step meeting that makes you feel at home. I say, sometimes half jokingly saying, if you haven't been to a bad meeting, then you're not going to enough meetings. If you feel uncomfortable in a meeting, you should try to resolve it or seek another meeting. A group may also do a group inventory, perhaps on a yearly basis, to see how it's going. Good relations is reaching the suffering alcoholics. Tradition 4, group inventory questions. Some groups take inventory by examining our 12 traditions one at a time to determine how well they are living up to these principles from the AA group. Does our group insist that there are only a few right ways of doing this AA thing? Does the group consider the welfare of nearby groups in its actions and decisions, or AA as a whole? Does a group judge or criticize other groups' behavior, or do we learn from them? Does a group bear in mind that our behaviors reflect the fellowship? Does a group help a newcomer go through any links within the perimeters of the group conscience? Does the group truly honor the concept of minority opinion? Tradition 4 grants AA group freedom with responsibility to the whole. Each 12-step group has complete freedom to decide for itself the program content of its meeting and the topics that will be discussed. The group can decide if the meeting will be open or closed, and when and where the meeting will be held. Each group can decide to change its meeting format and has complete authority to spend its funds as needed. The group can also decide on how it wishes to begin and end its meetings. Some groups close with a prayer, while others have a moment of silence. In all these matters, each group has a total freedom. It's entirely up to the membership of that individual group. But the second part of this tradition reminds reminds each group that it has a responsibility also to worldwide fellowship and other groups. By adhering to to the traditions and principles of the program, each group can assure that it will not stray too far away from the program's basic tenets. Limit to freedom granted by the fourth tradition. The autonomy provided in the fourth tradition 4 does not mean the individual group has authority to reword the 12 steps or 12 traditions to create its own literature, nor does the groups introduce, discuss, or sell outside literature at their meeting places. Other than that, groups have complete freedom to design their programs for the needs of their members, which can result in a wide variety of formats. Many a meeting has gotten away from the look and feel of its primary purpose by allowing non-conference approved literature, showing videos of popular self-help speakers, or allowing treatment professionals to speak at open meetings on the latest therapy techniques. There is a saying that there is no right or wrong way to hold a meeting, but the group can cease carrying the message if it strays too far away from the traditions and concepts. How the group autonomy creates different environments. One AA member describes what it's like when encountering groups that did this differently. He said that when he first came to AA, he learned how it went in his little group, and he went through the other groups in neighboring towns. We would think they don't do their meetings right simply because they weren't the same as the first group he went to. Today, these little things that used to bother him make him realize that they're what makes all these groups unique and different. He looks forward to the different meetings now because they're unique in their own rights. As long as the guidelines of the program are followed and the basic message is there for everyone, the academy of each group is one more example why Alcoholics Anonymous works. Excerpt from online AA article. Autonomy is a simple form of independence that gives each group the latitude to be creative. When it wants to appeal to certain fractions of the alcoholic community as a large, so as long as it doesn't cross over into making these painful mistakes that could lead us down the path that led the dismantling of these groups that came before AA. Today in AA, we have meetings that cater to specific segments of AA population, such as men's meeting, women's meetings, closed meetings, alcoholics only, open meetings, gay and lesbian meetings, step study, big book, Spanish speaking, and on and on. The common theme for all these meetings is carry the message to the alcoholic who still suffers. Anyone who has a desire to quit drinking cannot be turned away. Indeed, that meeting will want to continue to be called an AA meeting. On the request of some of his friends, AA friends in the West Coast, Bill was on a train going to California to speak at several well-planned out meetings. The members of AA in a small Midwestern town heard that his train would be stopping in their own town and asked if he would consider stopping over for a day and speaking at their meeting. He agreed to do this usually in those days. When the train arrived in the town, when the train arrived, the town members expected Bill to arrive with an entourage of people assisting him, and they had arranged a welcoming with a band, a large crowd, and all the town dignitaries. When the train stopped, the only one that got off was Bill, as he walked down the ramp alone with one suitcase. He proceeded to the planned meeting place, and as the meeting began, Bill was somewhat shocked when the members started the meeting with several church hymns. Nevertheless, he fulfilled his promise and gave his talk, and was again disturbed when the meeting ended with several more hymns. After completing his stay at the boarded train, he boarded the train and continued on his way. On the train, what kept bothering Bill was, what are they doing in AA with the hymns? And it didn't seem right. Then Bill started thinking about the size of the population of the small town and about the large number of alcoholics that attended that meeting. And he concluded that per capita, that was probably the largest meeting in the country. And if they wanted to sing hymns, well, that's their business. Every AA group is exactly alike, but just a bit different. You can do almost any type of meeting if you want, as long as it doesn't affect the group's AA as a whole. If you're trying to start or move a brick and mortar meeting, it's best to check where and when to see what meetings are around you and what their formats and start times are before starting it, since it will affect their group in the vicinity. Tradition 4, a personal checklist. Do I insist that there are only a few right ways of doing this AA thing? Does my group consider the welfare of the nearby groups and its actions and decisions, or as a whole? Do I judge or criticize the members' behavior when it's different than mine, or do I learn from it? Do I always bear in mind that to those outsiders who I know I'm in AA, may I do some extent represent to entire the beloved fellowship? Am I willing to help a newcomer to go to any lengths, their lengths, not mine, to stay sober? Do I ever criticize certain groups because I think they don't do things how I believe AA should be done? And
Thank you, Wayne. Thank you for your service. Thank you. Okay, if we don't have any questions, I think we'll continue. Tupper, come on in.
My name's Tupper. I'm an alcoholic. Tradition 5. Each group has but one primary purpose: to carry the message to the alcoholic who still suffers. From 12 and 12, page 150. Shoemaker, stick to thy last. Better do one thing supremely well than many badly. That is the central theme of this tradition. Around it, our society gathers in unity. The very life of our fellowship requires the preservation of this principle. Alcoholics Anonymous can be likened to a group of physicians who might find a cure for cancer, and upon whose concerted work would depend the answer for sufferers of this disease. True, each physician in such a group might have his own specialty. Every doctor concerned would at times wish he could devote himself to his chosen field rather than work only with the group. But once these men had hit upon a cure, once it became apparent that only by their unified effort could this be accomplished, then all of them would feel bound to devote themselves solely to the relief of cancer. In the radiance of such a miraculous discovery, any doctor would set his other ambitions aside at whatever personal cost. The tradition is quite simple to understand. The group, which is comprised of individual members, of course, has only one job, and that is to carry the message to the alcoholic who still suffers. If a group is not getting newcomers to come in and get sober and then stay sober, then there is something missing in that group. There is something that the group is not doing correctly. We all know that we must give it away in order to keep it. And what is the message that we carry? We carry the message of hope. We let the newcomer know that AA works. It is the path to sobriety. Sober members of AA clearly carry the message by their appearance, behavior, and statements. They are free of the alcohol obsession, and many have received the promises. They are clean, well-dressed and groomed, well-fed, and grateful to be sober. They are happy to talk freely about their experience, strength, and hope in AA. They are working step 12. There is only one message for us to carry. As for how a person manages the rest of their affairs, unless their sobriety is undoubtedly at risk, these affairs are none of our business. Most alcoholics need a strong support system in order to stay sober. Without a sense of fellowship, recovery often fails. And in many ways, the fifth tradition is all about the need to deliver this sense of fellowship to the newcomers, those who are entering recovery with fresh wounds left from their addictions and may feel a bit lost and isolated as a result. We need to also remember to carry the message, not the alcoholic. Newcomers cannot come to AA meetings looking for a job, alone, nor boarding. That's not what AA meetings are for. We frequently say that the newcomer is the future and the lifeblood of AA, but the converse is certainly true. AA is the salvation of the newcomer, the most easily identifiable suffering alcoholic. Tradition 5 refers to the group's sacred trust to carry the message of our program to the alcoholic who still suffers. In this article, in April 1948 edition of the Grapevine, Bill W. calls this a tremendous responsibility and obligation so great it amounts to a sacred trust. He goes on to remind us that we should not take on other tasks, not be diverted from this primary one. Tradition 4, where each group is autonomous, flows right into tradition 5, where each group has but one primary purpose. If you were to break tradition 4 and start an AA group called the Flat Earth AA Society Group, there's nothing AA can do about it. If GSO in New York got a wind of it, they might send a representative to sit in on the meeting and observe, and then perhaps send a letter to the group to let them know that it is our experience that such groups do not prosper, etc. AA cannot shut them down, but they would probably disband in short order because they would not be sticking to the fifth tradition of carrying the AA message and helping the alcoholic who still suffers. I didn't go to in-person meetings that didn't have newcomers or visitors attending the meeting. Those meetings often felt stale because the same message was being regurgitated to the same people. Even on Zoom, I mostly attended meetings that have a nice mix of newcomers and not so newcomers. But the newcomer is not the only alcoholic who still suffers. Many a member with years of sobriety may be hit by some difficulty that can disturb his emotional sobriety and even put him at risk of drinking. Indeed, some do drink. Maybe that is because some step was not completed or some defect of character has reared up. Perhaps they rested on their laurels. Whatever the reason, that member can also be considered a suffering alcoholic. I once heard a speaker with long-term sobriety referred to the bedevilments Bill W. wrote about, and Bill W. wrote about these in Alcoholics Anonymous in the chapter, page 52, We Agnostics. The speaker pointed out that even members with long-term sobriety can be subject to these bedevilments: trouble with personal relationships, inability to control emotional natures, prey to misery and depression, unable to make a living, feeling useless, fear, unhappiness, and not seeming to help others. When these conditions are present, the alcoholic, no matter how long sober, is suffering. And tradition 5 applies just as it does for the newcomer. The checklist for tradition 5. Number 1, do I ever cop out by saying, I'm not a group, so this or that tradition doesn't apply to me? Number 2, am I willing to explain firmly to a newcomer the limitations of AA help, even if he gets mad at me for not giving him a loan? Number 3, have I today imposed on any AA member for a special favor or consideration simply because I'm a fellow alcoholic? Number 4, am I willing to 12th step the next newcomer without regard to who or what is in it for me? Number 5, do I help my group in every way I can to fulfill our primary purpose? And lastly, number 6, do I remember the AA old timers too can be alcoholics who still suffer? Do I try both to help them and to learn from them? Thank you.
Thank you, Tupper. Thank you for your service. Thank you. Okay. We don't have any questions. We'll go on to tradition 6. And Mike, come on in.